Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning back in to our series on ABA and MTSS-B. My name is Molly White. I'm from the New Hampshire Department of Education, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Alyssa and Jess. So Alyssa, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, Molly. My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm the Director of Behavioral Health for Constellation's Behavioral Services.
Thank you. And Jess, I was hoping you could introduce yourself and provide a little perspective on your district's unique situation with MTSS-B and ABA.
Sure, of course. Thank you for having me today. So I'm the Director of Health and Wellness for the Raymond School District. And so it's a sort of holistic role that really supports the whole student and really supports implementing high fidelity MTSS-B. So in this role, I oversee 504 plans. I oversee the nurses, school psychologists, counselors, and school social workers, and our mental health counselors. And again, I'm sort of the team lead and champion for implementation of MTSS-B. And so it's been really interesting to get to know my ABA and BCBA friends and really learn more about the science of behavior and really try to bake that into our school culture and our district culture and how we are interpreting behavior and intervening with behavior on behalf of our students.
Awesome. Thank you. So for our listeners, we have covered MTSS-B a little bit across the tiers, but Alyssa, I'm curious if you could provide a little perspective on how Constellations and your therapists in general have been pushing in support and aligning it within MTSS-B.
Sure, Molly. Constellations has been involved really at each tier within Raymond, which is, first of all, I'll credit Raymond with even being able to recognize that that's something that is appropriate. I think we've talked a little bit in the past about how ABA can be kind of siloed into tier 3. So they were able to recognize that if we really used behavioral science at every tier, that we could probably get faster buy-in and implementation with fidelity of those systems. So we've had therapists who are on the ground, boots on the ground, doing the work with the students directly. We have behavior analysts who are in there working with case managers and teachers and helping them to identify, as just mentioned, good responses for students who perhaps are, demonstrating challenging behavior or a specific need. We also have some programs in place for students at the tier 3 level who require a more significant and intensive level of support and skill building. And then we've been doing a lot of collaboration with Raymond around training administration and training leadership. So really looking at, we know that when good change happens, it's usually that, at the leadership top level, and then all of that good change bleeds down. At least that's been our goal. So really working with everybody to, come up with our goals and push our way through those goals, train our way through those goals and reinforce the change. So I'm excited about tomorrow. We have a training that we'll be doing with the assistant principals from each building, specifically focused on tier 1 and getting them prepped for working with the tier 1 teams that they're developing at each building. So I think it's going to be a really fantastic training day.
Awesome. I think you've really exemplified, reaching out past tier 3. I think, like you said, getting pigeonholed in tier 3, Raymond, like you said, reaching out to the community partners, you guys being experts in the field, it makes complete sense that you would kind of collaborate in this way. I'm curious, what have been some of the strengths? What's gone really well, those big celebrations and aha moments that you've had?
Yeah, I think for me, what I'll share is it just sort of seeing building administrators and those who are responsible for student discipline to really start thinking through what is prompting that behavior and really starting to think through, instead of looking at it as discipline, really starting to look at it as intervention. So what are we reinforcing? What is motivating that behavior? And so there's deeper thought going into, our responses. And so, for example, if we've through our training with Constellations learned that a student is really trying to avoid the school building, we're clear that suspending them out of the building is actually reinforcing their behavior, right? And so I think the exciting thing is that our administration really understands that now. And so they're just starting to think through, how can we react differently, because we do want this behavior to end, and historically we've reinforced it. So for me, I think that's one of the biggest strengths, but I'm sure Alyssa has some others as well.
Yeah, I think it's been a really fun relationship, so I could touch on a few things. I think one big win for us, honestly, has been that we started our relationship in the midst of the pandemic, or just before the pandemic started. And so the fact that Raymond has come through to this point where we are, and we're still working together and we're still pushing MTSS-B, even though it's been really, really hard, has been a really big win. And they've really persevered with us. And so the collaboration has been really a very communicative and transparent one. So I have to say, just the overall collaboration has been a big success for us. Yeah, I don't know. I feel as though we had a really cool PD day this past year, where we worked together to make it really outside of the box for the staff. We tried really hard to make sure we had cool messaging and bring the fun in for the staff too. So there were yard games. It was catered. There was fun. There was a yoga class. You know, we did a lot of brainstorming together as a team. So I think Raymond does a really nice job of inviting us in for those kind of meetings and idea sessions, and it ends up resulting in some great collaboration.
Yeah, and the one last thing I'll share too is just, we've had some real successes on the individual student level, whether they were students on IEPs or students who weren't. Really seeing teams come together and really use the expertise of constellations, and really developing a clear plan, and seeing teams working around students and celebrating those successes has been really neat to see. And I think after a pandemic, when kids are really could be struggling socially and emotionally, it's been really exciting just to see teachers feeling successful in terms of how they're managing, you know, certain student behavior.
Yeah, I think, you know, you guys are really exemplifying what MTSS-B hopes for in terms of school community collaboration. You know, it's the schools are on the front lines. There's no two ways about it. You have the students there in front of you. They're a captive audience, but then reaching out to the community and saying, hey, we need help, we need support, and leveraging those experts of the field is just exemplary of what we would hope for. You kind of mentioned, you lead it into my next question, which was around leveraging your community in kind of out of the box ways. How have you taken community partners and utilized them in ways that we might not be thinking about already?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the examples I'm reflecting on as you're asking that question is, you know, Constellation's really kind of digging a little bit more into our tier 2 supports and services. And so we have an alternative program in our district for students who may struggle socially and emotionally and are a little bit behind academically. And it was really not jiving well this year. And so we invited Constellations in. We said, take a peek. You know, we're open to any recommendations, things we can do in the short term, but then also some things that might help us in terms of next year, because we know we can't totally course correct midway through the year. And they had some really great recommendations. I mean, first, obviously there were some very typical sort of ABA, BCBA kind of lens recommendations, which made total sense in terms of how we're managing the room and how we're sharing expectations, but that also that, you know, we needed to do more relationship building with those students. And so the recommendation was that at least once a month, there be a fun activity with the adults who are really connected to those students. And we have a local youth coalition in town, Raymond Coalition for Youth, who's been in existence for 20 years, which is a unicorn in itself. Yeah. And they were already kind of connected to this program because that's their jam. That, you know, they really want to support at-risk youth. And so they partnered with us to help us run fun activities, both in the building, but also in the community. And so they have been running these monthly activities with our students. And it's so cool to hear that they've been showing up this summer to meet with the coalition. So not only did they get the support in the school year, they're having these touch points in the summer with really helpful adults who they know they're going to see in the building next year. And so I just can't wait to see how that really supports us in developing a new norm with them when we hit the ground running in the fall. But it was a really unique sort of combination of community partners with Constellations, the district, and another community partner, the Raymond Coalition for Youth.
Mm. And that's amazing, wrapping the services around outside of the September to June window. The consistency is key. So that's super impressive. I'm curious, we've had a lot of talk of great things going on, the celebrations, and rightfully so. I think the work you're doing is amazing, but I'm curious if there have been any barriers to the work or any challenges that have come up on either end.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, Molly. And I think, it hasn't all been rainbows and daisies, for us in terms of this work, right? And it never will be. Change is hard. I think one of the challenges for us, and I think we kind of clicked a little bit more this year, was really just getting everyone to be on the same page about why constellations, like why are we looking at ABA, BCBA, like lens stuff. So to really get that buy-in from not just leaders, but also, our folks who are interfacing with our students on a regular basis. That was very difficult through a pandemic, especially when teachers were having to learn how to provide remote instruction, how to provide hybrid instruction. So just that, and I validate this for educators, that mindset of like, you're giving me one more thing to do. You're telling me to change one more thing. And from the last 20 years of my teaching, I've done X when Johnny does Y, and now you want me to do Z. So I think that was a challenge, but it's one that we probably predicted and knew that we were going to have to work through. So that was one that kind of jumped out at first for me.
I would second that, Jess. I think, we've probably talked about this many times, right? That just the climate of where teachers are at, right? Just how they're feeling. And in the midst of a pandemic, you're also asking me to do something different. And you're asking me to allow people into my classroom to look at my tier 1 implementation. What? Really hard for people. So that was challenging. I think with regard to tier 2, so we did a pilot program. Jess mentioned that high school group that our agency was able to support, but we also did a pilot program for tier 2 at the high school and at the middle school level, where the students were using the PBIS Rewards app to access reinforcement for coming to skill building classes and doing check-in, check-out and things of that nature. And I mean, pure and simple logistics, what we learned was running pilots at the end of a school year when there's field day and assemblies and all of the things. Sometimes it's just, you get really excited about new ideas and rolling things out. And then we hit a lot of obstacles with that. I mean, we learned a lot along the way. So I think we still valued the experience, but it was tricky as well.
Right. Like we learned the appropriate group size by school type.
Yeah, we sure did. The
other interesting thing that wasn't necessarily it turned into a barrier inadvertently, but what we learned through that too is that our community is open to tier 2 intervention. We didn't have a single family decline their child's involvement, which turned into a group that was probably a smidge too large, but we just didn't anticipate that. And so that's a great opportunity and something for us to think through next year when we hit the ground running with tier 2 groups.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message. Sometimes, I was guilty of this as an educator. You predict the no, like, oh no, there's no way they'll buy into this, or no, there's no way they would do this. And you kind of self-sabotage in that way. So just allowing yourself to ask and look for the yes, that's fantastic. So it sounds like potentially there were some timing barriers, group size, and then it just sounded like in general buy-in was an important thing to garner before moving the work forward.
Absolutely.
Are there any other kind of thoughts or lingering messages you would like to share about, taking on MTSS-B, leveraging your BCBAs and your ABA therapists, having this happen in a school community, and in your community? Anything else you would want to kind of share or close out with?
I think what I would just emphasize is how valuable it was having them at the table for planning and having that table for leadership meetings to really understand the ways in which they could support us. When I think of some of the things we accomplished this year, if we didn't have them at the table, we wouldn't have known how they could have helped us. So that professional development day was such a perfect example of their own lens, really helping us identify what would be a successful day. And it was one of our highest received PD days so far since I've been here. So I just think that that's important to really, when you're looking at district and community leadership teams, to really make sure that the folks who are heaviestly involved in your buildings or your district to really be at that table.
Yeah. I'd also like to add, listening to the students is so important. And that was one thing that I learned going through the Tier 2 pilot programs. We have a couple high schoolers who've demonstrated that they would really like to be peer coaches for next year, which is really exciting that they bought in so tremendously. And they also really were very vocal about not wanting the things that occur in group to feel like school. So when we had assignments for them after group, we were not allowed to call it homework. We had to call them challenges, and group had to be called group, but not class. And let's see, I'm trying to think of some of the other things. Everything had to have a special name. Nothing could smell like or look like an assignment or a school related thing. They really looked at their Tier 2 supports as, something kind of outside of academics. So really hearing the students on that and honoring some of those wishes, which were easy changes for us, really did help those students with buy-in and wanting to be there. So I think that ties into what Jess was saying about relationship building and everything, but it just really listening to those students because they have great ideas.
I think that's a great point though, is the little changes, like the positive reframing. I actually, as you were saying that, it illuminated to me, I did it without even knowing it. Rather than taking my dog for a walk, I call it going on an adventure, because taking a dog on a walk sounds really boring. And I think that's exactly it. We have the power to do that in most anything we do, is just framing it in a more positive and exciting way. So thank you for sharing that. I want to thank you both for taking time out of your day to, highlight some of the work going on in Raymond and demonstrating how this can really happen at any school in any district. And thank you to our audience for listening in. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments. We will be checking back in and hopefully doing a Q&A video to wrap out the series. So with that, we hope you stay well, and we'll see you in the next video.